Halo, Reach. Chapter 1. The bright morning sun slowly crested over the horizon of planet Reach, casting its warm glow across rolling green hills and thick forests. Reach was a colonial jewel for humanity, a lush, vibrant, and brimming with life. It was one of the most successful colonies ever established, representing a great step forward in humanity's expansion across the stars. But what truly made Reach invaluable was its role as a bastion of military might. As a heavily armed and fortified planet, Reach stood as the heart of the United Nations Space Command's unyielding defenses against emerging threats on the frontier. Massive bases, shipyards, and training grounds dotted Reach's surface, crawling with the men and vehicles that made up the backbone of humanity's naval power. From heavily armored Scorpion tanks to squadrons of longsword fighters, Reach contained a formidable array of military assets. The planet's orbit was filled with even more, fleets of frigates, destroyers, cruisers, and carriers ready to respond at a moment's notice. This morning, activity buzzed across Camp Independence, one of Reach's sprawling military installations. The base housed thousands of Marines and naval crewmen, and its vehicle depot was filled with ranks of warthogs, mongooses, scorpions, and pelicans standing at the ready. In Independence's largest vehicle bay, a group of technicians swarmed around one of the UNSC's most advanced weapons, the MJOLNIR Mark V armored exoskeleton. The culmination of decades of research and development, the MJOLNIR suit made the wearer a veritable one-man army. A fusion of armor, computer systems, and power amplifiers, it gave the user incredible strength, speed, damage resistance, and reaction time. The suit's shields could absorb fire from small arms and shrapnel, while the thick armor plating could take glancing blows from even heavy plasma cannons. Targeting systems linked directly to the helmet's A2D for enhanced combat awareness and coordination. Today, the technicians were running final checks on one particular suit, a last-minute addition to Reach's premier fire team of Spartan super soldiers, Noble Team. Their newest member would be arriving any minute to take possession of it. The techs stepped back from their work, observing the empty MJOLNIR armor that stood at attention by itself. A nearby door suddenly slid open with a hiss, and a figure stepped into the bay. He was a Spartan, clad in a simple fatigues uniform. But his presence immediately commanded respect and attention. He seemed to radiate a quiet professionalism honed by years of warfare. The new arrival wordlessly approached the waiting MJOLNIR suit, sizing it up as he circled it. "She's all yours, Lieutenant," one of the technicians said. "MJOLNIR Mark V, customized for Noble Team per your specifications. She's ready for action." The Spartan gave a simple nod. He stepped up onto the suit's rear armor assembly and slid his legs into the lower portion. With a series of clicks and hisses, the suit automatically adjusted and attached itself to his body. As the Spartan finished donning the helmeted upper portion, a green light flashed across his ID, indicating full integration. Information streamed into his mind from the armor, shield strength, weapon inventory, communications systems. He blinked twice, synchronizing the suit's neural interface with his thoughts. The technician approached with a large weapons/equipment pod, which the Spartan took and effortlessly strapped across his back. Inside were extra ammunition, grenades, tools, and a spare MA-37 assault rifle. The pod integrated with his MJOLNIR armor systems. The Spartan's HUD flickered with an incoming transmission notification, and he opened the comm channel. "Noble 6, this is Carter. I'm sending a Pelican to bring you to our op center We have new orders from HIGCOM, get ready. The message ended abruptly. Noble 6 didn't reply, only turning and striding towards the vehicle bay exit. As he emerged into the morning sun, a Pelican dropship swung down from the sky above and came to hover over the landing pad. Stepping on board, Noble 6 took one last look at Camp Independence as the Pelican lifted off, bound for parts unknown. Wherever Noble 6 was headed next, it was sure to end in battle against enemies of the UNSC. That was his sole purpose in life, to be a relentless instrument of human military power, without hesitation or remorse. The Spartan super soldier was a living weapon, and Reach was his new home. Chapter 2. The Pelican dropship carrying Noble 6 cut through thin wisps of cloud as it sailed over mountain forests towards its destination, deep in Reach's northern territories. 6 spent the flight checking and rechecking every last component of his new MJOLNIR Mark V armor, familiarizing himself with the advanced suit's capabilities. Satisfied with its performance, after multiple tactical system checks, 6's thoughts drifted to the squad he was now part of, a noble team. They were an elite 6 Spartan special warfare unit, handpicked from the ranks of the Spartan Roman III program due to their particularly outstanding abilities. Originally formed as a 5-man team, Noble was among the very best the UNSC had to offer, undertaking highly sensitive missions across many campaigns. Though this would be his first operation with them, 6 had thoroughly studied Noble Team's service record. He knew full well the capacious shoes he had to fill. As the Pelican began its descent, 6 saw a military outpost nestled between snow-capped peaks come into view. This was FOB Jaguar, Noble Team's forward operating base. The dropship flared and hovered over a landing pad as 6 leapt out, dropping over 15 feet to the ground. His armor absorbed the impact seamlessly, and 6 briskly walked toward the main prefab structure, where 4 figures awaited him. These were his new teammates, assembled to evaluate their latest addition. Leading them was Carter, a 259, Noble Team's no-nonsense commanding officer and a natural-born leader. He wordlessly eyed 6 with a piercing gaze, taking his measure. On Carter's left stood the Spartan known as John, a 266, the team's sniper specialist. Despite the casual way he leaned against the building wall, 6 identified John's alert stance. His fingers never strayed far from the pistol at his thigh. On Carter's right was the heavy weapons and demolitions expert, Jorge 52. Of the Spartan Roman II class, he was one of the longest-serving and most experienced soldiers in the entire UNSC. Jorge gave 6 a respectful nod as he approached. The final figure was Cat B320, Noble Team's intelligence specialist and technical expert. Though her armor was splattered with grease from some half-finished repair job, Kat's gaze was sharp and inquisitive. Carter stepped forward to greet the new arrival. "Lieutenant, glad you could join us." 6 delivered a crisp salute. "Sir, reporting as ordered." "Welcome to Noble." Carter's voice was firm, but not unkind. "I'll be honest, we've lost a lot of good soldiers lately. Command's decided our unit needs a shake-up. That's where you come in." The commander paused, then extended his hand. "This is Noble Team. We have a job to do, protect Reach, whatever the cost. You ready to join us and pull your weight?" 6 did not hesitate, gripping Carter's hand with resolve. "Ready to do my duty, sir." Satisfied, Carter motioned towards Cat with a tilt of his helmet. "Get Noble 6 here up to speed on the intel so far, then suit up. We have new orders effective immediately." Cat nodded, projecting a map of Reach along with camera footage and sensor data. We've got reports of Covenant activity out in the remote Viri region. Communications with the Visegrad relay went down. Colonel Holland wants us to investigate. She pointed to an area far from the main population centers, nestled between mountain peaks. If the Covenant took down the relay, there are sure to be hostiles still in the area. We move in fast and quiet, assess the situation, and neutralize any targets. This kind of op is right up our alley. Understood. We'll get it done, Carter affirmed, before turning to Noble 6. I'm assigning you to pull reconnaissance with June, get a feel for each other's style while scoping out the terrain. The rest of us will provide tactical support from the Pelican. Jorge loaded up his massive heavy machine gun with a satisfied grin. Just like old times. Mount up, nobles, Carter commanded simply. The team strode toward the waiting dropship, weapons at the ready. As Six climbed into the blood tray, he felt the anticipation of combat swelling within him. Securing his MA-37 rifle, he watched Reach's wilderness sweep beneath them. Where the Covenant lurked, Noble Team would hunt them down. Chapter 3. Wind whipped through the blood tray as Noble Team's Pelican swept low over Reach's northern forests. Six scanned the terrain intently through his MA-37 scope, while John piloted the aircraft towards the coordinates of the downed Visegrad relay. There was no sign of activity on the landscape below, but that meant little. The Covenant were masters of stealth and subterfuge when they wished it. At Carter's signal, Jun brought the Pelican in fast to the relay station's location, a small clearing surrounded by snow-dusted pines. As the ship touched down, Six and Jun leapt from the bay doors, weapons raised. Moving swiftly between the trees, they began sweeping the area for any hostiles. There was no movement, no sound except the wind. Approaching the relay station itself, a small prefab structure atop a ridge, Six saw that the door had been violently ripped from its frame. The Spartans entered cautiously, finding overturned computer banks and surveillance equipment thrown about inside. Jun whistled as he examined energy scorches along the walls. Plasma damage, no doubt about it. Covenant have been here. Then let's pick up the trail before it goes cold, Carter suggested over comms from the circling Pelican. See if you can track where they went from the relay Noble 3. Jun moved outside, carefully studying the snowy ground until he found a path of alien footprints, half buried by the elements. Found something. I'll follow and report what I see. 6. Move to higher ground and watch my 6. With a silent nod, 6 headed up the ridge to an elevated position that gave him a good vantage on the terrain and Jun's movements. He spotted Jun following the faint trail down into a valley between snow-capped peaks. Carter's voice suddenly crackled over the radio. Noble 3, what's your status? Report in. There was no response from Jun except ambient noise of the wind. Carter repeated his hail. Jun, do you respond? Still nothing but silence, ratcheting up the tension. Finally, Kat chimed in, unease creeping into her usually steady voice. Noble 6, can you see Noble 3 from your position? 6 scanned the valley through his rifle scope, but saw no sign of Jun or the trail he'd been following. Negative, no visual on 3. Then we need to get down there. Now something's wrong, Carter decided. 6, you're closer. Investigate his last known position, but keep your head down. We'll move in to support. 6 was already sliding down the rocky ridge towards the valley floor when flames erupted from the tree line ahead. Blossoms of plasma fire raked the hillside, forcing the Spartan behind cover. Grunts chattered excitedly from the underbrush, as more searing bolts impacted around Six. Using his armor's enhanced strength, Six heaved a large boulder down the slope to distract the Covenant position. As the aliens shifted fire to the tumbling rock, Six vaulted over his cover and raced towards the tree line. His shields flared as he sprinted through plasma bursts, closing the distance in seconds. Priming a frag grenade, he hurled it into the brush, then switched to his rifle's shotgun attachment. The grenade's explosion, amidst panicked shouts, was drowned out by the boom of 12-gauge buckshot shredding into alien flesh. In the grenade's aftermath, Six stormed through the vegetation to find a handful of grunt corpses and smoldering plant life. One grunt that had survived the carnage screeched in terror before Six ended its cries with a savage kick, snapping its neck. He scanned for more contacts, but found only empty forest and silence. "Covey's down," Six reported tersely, swapping back to his rifle. "Jun is still MIA, though." "Keep looking, but watch yourself," Carter reminded. "These things rarely patrol alone." Continuing cautiously downhill through the pine forest, Six eventually emerged from the trees into a large snow-covered clearing. At its far end stood a towering ancient stone edifice, covered in alien glyphs and extended minimally into the air. It was clearly not human-made. Six realized this must have been what originally drew the Covenant scouting party to the area. Approaching slowly, Six strained all his senses for threats. But it appeared the area was abandoned, at least for now. Circling the monolith, Six finally spotted Jun. The sniper was sprawled face down in the snow behind the edifice. Rushing over, Six checked Jun's vitals. Though unconscious and wounded, the Spartan was miraculously still alive. "I found 3. He's out cold but stable," Six reported. He quickly applied biofoam to Jun's plasma burns. "I'll get him back to the LZ for evac." "Good work, Six," Carter acknowledged. "Secure the area while we move into Posey." A titanic explosion drowned out the rest of Carter's orders. Six's head reflexively jerked up towards the deafening noise. High overhead, a fireball cascaded through the clouds where the Pelican had been circling. Six could only watch in horror as the dropship's burning and twisted fuselage tumbled down into a distant peak. "Noble 1, respond." Six barked into the comm, but all he heard back was the crackle of static. Next came the heavy thudding of Covenant ships breaching atmosphere, descending over the mountains behind him. Plasma turrets came alive, saturating the landscape with searing bolts. They had sprung their trap perfectly. Acting fast amidst the chaos, Six heaved Jun onto his shoulders and sprinted as fast as his MJOLNIR armor's bones and hydraulics would carry them. Away from the ancient site and into the pine forest for cover. Away from the raining plasma fire and fury. Away from the full-scale Covenant invasion force that had entrapped them. Chapter 4. Plasma streaked past in a deadly curtain as Six rushed them both through the pine forest. Grunts hooted and hollered from the valley behind, rallying for the kill. The Covenant sought to trap their prey between their own advance and the impassable mountain slopes ahead. But Noble 6 was a survivor. He darted between the trees, using the thick trunks for cover while making slow but steady progress carrying Jun's unconscious body. Each weaving maneuver bought them a few more precious seconds of life. The grunts were closing in fast, their chatter and howls growing louder among the trees. They would soon overwhelm the Spartans with sheer numbers. Reaching a sheer rock face where the pines tapered off, Six eased Jun gently to the ground, then spun around, rifle leveled at the oncoming alien horde. The first few grunts to burst from the undergrowth were cut down in a withering hail of gunfire. Those behind them cried out in dismay before returning fire. The air sizzled with crisscrossing plasma as six darted left and right, firing controlled bursts to maximize his dwindling ammo. For every grunt killed, two more seemed to take its place in the endless tide. They pressed forward heedless of their losses, sensing inevitable victory. With his rifle finally exhausted, Six detached the weapon and drew his combat knife. Better to die on his feet in defiant struggle than be burned down fleeing. The frenzied grunts charged, believing their enemy cornered and helpless. They realized their mistake too late, as Noble Six exploded into action, carving a path through their ranks in close quarters fury. The blade slashed through alien throats and pierced soft belly flesh again and again on pure muscle memory. Ducking under swinging plasma pistols, Six kept the grunts at bay with merciless efficiency, even as their numbers overwhelmed. A lucky shot from a needler exploded against Six's shoulder, knocking his shield down as a dozen more needles impaled his armor in response. Grimacing from the damage, Six deflected an eager grunt's plasma bayonet and claimed its weapon for himself. The Spartan spun and fired, downing nearby foes with sizzling bursts before more needles impacted and drained his shield once more. With his armor smoking from damage, Six drove forward in a final act of defiant rage. If this was to be his last stand, he would make it memorable. A thunderous roar from above halted the struggle instantly. Both sides glanced skyward to see a UNSC Hornet swoop over the ridge, raining a missile barrage into the massed Covenant infantry. Before they could react, a renewing hail of chain-gun fire ripped through their ranks. From the gunship's open bay door, a single figure dropped, crushing a grunt beneath his bulky boots. It was Jorge, massively overgunned with a belt-fed grenade launcher. Balloons of shrapnel explosions ravaged the panicking grunts as Jorge advanced with thudding heavy footfalls. Cavalry's arrived. Six. Jorge bellowed over the din. Give him hell. Happy to oblige, Six vented his fury into the remaining Covenant soldiers, downing each with methodical shots. Within seconds, the flank had collapsed completely. With the grunts routed, Six rushed to Jorge's side. Jun's wounded but stable. What happened to the Pelican? Covenant cruisers slipped some stealth probes past Reach's defenses, Jorge explained grimly. Ambushed us out of nowhere, Cat's Pelican got shot down too. Six felt despair grip him. Then the others, Carter and Cat? Jorge shook his head. Don't know, communications are still scrambled. He motioned to the Hornet, where a pair of Army troopers had set up a triage site for June. We'll get him evacuated, then find the others. Colonel Holland's mobilizing all of Sword Base to respond. As they rushed Jun aboard, Six gazed out from the ridge towards distant plumes of smoke rising along the horizon from the Covenant landing zones. Phantoms and banshees swarmed through the skies like angry hornets. The full-scale invasion had caught them unprepared. Reach has been good to us, Jorge said solemnly. Time we return the favor. Nodding, Six helped Jorge aboard as the Hornet lifted off, racing towards the growing pillars of alien ships breaching atmosphere. They flew low through the mountain valleys, evading Covenant patrols still mobilizing for their blitzkrieg advance. Over the radio, Six heard frantic chatter from Holland, commanding as many troops as possible to defensive positions. Passing near Carter's crash site, Six peered down and saw only twisted and smoldering wreckage. There was no way anything could have survived that hellish impact. Six clenched his fist and muttered a silent prayer for his fallen commander. One day he would avenge them all. Dropping into a rocky canyon that shielded them from enemy sensors, the Hornet set down just outside of Sword Base, a heavily fortified bunker complex built into the mountainside. It was there that Holland had established his forward command while organizing Reach's defenses. Inside Sword's operations center was controlled chaos as officers and technicians worked feverishly amidst cacophonous alarms. Holland spotted Jorge and Six as they entered and approached quickly. His expression was haggard but unyielding. "Troopers, your team was supposed to stop this from happening," Holland said pointedly. "Now we've got a full-scale invasion on our doorstep." "Sir, we lost most of our squad in the initial ambush," Jorge reported regretfully. "Couldn't have anticipated their stealth units." Holland's face softened slightly, realizing there was plenty of blame to go around. "Then it's time for payback. I need noble team now more than ever." He clasped Jorge's shoulder. "Get yourselves rearmed and into the fight. We'll make these bastards regret ever finding Reach." Holland suddenly turned his gaze to a darkened corner of the room. From the shadows emerged a lone figure. Cat. "My pelican went down same as yours," she reported. "But I made my way here through the surface tunnels." Jorge nodded, relief spreading across his face. "It's good to see you in one piece." "Likewise," Cat said with a smile. "Heard you saved our rookie's sorry ass." Six scoffed. "I had the situation under control." "Sure you did," Cat teased before turning serious. "Carter didn't make it, though." Jorge shook his head. "Afraid not. We'll need a new leader." "Then I'm nominating you," Cat said, stepping up to Jorge. "I can't imagine anyone better to lead us into hell." Taken aback, Jorge mulled it over reluctantly before straightening with resolve. "If that's what you want, then I accept. We'll make the Covenant pay for what they've done." Holland nodded firmly. "That's what I want to hear. Now get back out there, Spartans. Reach needs you." Steeling themselves, Jorge, Cat, and Six headed for the vehicle bay to join the counterattack forces massing outside. They emerged into utter chaos, with warthogs and scorpion tanks jostling into formation amidst the wailing sirens. Jorge took the wheel of a warthog, with Six riding shotgun and Cat on the LAAG. Even in this dire hour, Noble Team was ready to face any odds. Chapter 5. Jorge slammed the warthog into high gear, engine roaring, as they raced from Sword Base into the cauldron of combat surrounding it. They swerved around lumbering scorpion tanks exchanging fire with Covenant wraiths on the smoky battlefield. Overhead, Hornet gunships dueled Banshees through the canyon walls. "Noble Team, focus on clearing a path to the relay outpost," Holland ordered over comms. "We lose that hub and our long-range communications are shot." "Acknowledged," Jorge responded. "Engaging Covenant forces blocking the route." Up ahead, a hailstorm of plasma bolts from an entrenched shade turret splashed across the Warthog's hood. Jorge hit the brakes, fishtailing them behind cover while Cat returned fire, forcing the Jackal gunners to duck behind the barricade. A fragmentation grenade from Six quickly flushed them out, and Cat hosed the fleeing aliens down in a stream of LAIG fire. "Area clear! Go, go, go!" Cat shouted. Jorge gunned the engine again, racing them up the winding mountain pass towards the comm relay's coordinates. They rounded a sharp bend to find the road blocked by a crushed civilian transport. Dead civilians and Marines littered the roadside, An elite general stood atop the barricade, barking orders. Seeing the warthog approach, the general roared and hefted a fuel-rod cannon. But before it could fire, the elite's head jerked back in a spray of purple blood as Jun's sniper round found its mark. The remaining Covenant soldiers looked around in confusion. "Move in while they're disoriented," Jorge commanded. He charged straight for the barricade as Six fired, his rifle one-handed, cutting down the confused grunts with headshots. At the last moment, Jorge yanked the wheel for a bootlegger reverse, perfectly aligning the warthog's rear with the blockade. "Cat, clear us a path." Her LAAG raked across the wreckage nonstop, chewing through metal and alien bodies until there was nothing but a smoking heap of rubble. Jorge punched the gas and they sailed up over the remains, landing hard on the other side. Their reckless charge had caught the Covenant position completely by surprise. "Nice work, team," Jun reported over comms from his concealed sniping perch. "I'll keep overwatch on you from here." Jorge raced them further up the winding mountain road until the relay outpost's massive satellite dish came into view. Unfortunately, it was already crawling with Covenant. A command post had been set up around the base. Grunts waddled about while jackal marksmen kept watch in roosts along the perimeter. "We've got to take that CP down fast before they have a chance to dig in or call for help," Jorge assessed. "Cat, think you can get inside the outpost facility ahead of us?" "Just point me to the nearest vent," Cat said, cracking her knuckles. She hopped off the still rolling warthog and grappled her way up onto the roof of the adjacent building. Hopping open an exterior duct, she crawled swiftly inside. "Jun, keep them distracted, Six, with me for the frontal assault," Jorge ordered as he swung the warthog back around towards the occupied outpost. Lining up on the road, he gunned the engine straight for the Covenant CP's outer perimeter. "Hang on." The warthog roared down the road full throttle. Grunts cried out in surprise as they swerved to avoid the speeding vehicle. When a fusillade of carbine rounds peppered the hood, Six returned fire with his rifle on full auto. The grunt gunner went down in a heap. Closing within grenade range, Six primed a frag and flung it into a clustered squad, sending bodies flying. Their hijacked transport ground to a halt as it crashed through a plasma barricade. Jumping down into cover, Six and Jorge began pushing through the Covenant's makeshift fortifications towards the outpost entrance. The enemy returned fire chaotically, with criss-crossing plasma bolts and needler shards impacting around the two Spartans. An elite miner wielding a sword led the charge, but a .50 caliber round from Jun's sniper crashed through its skull before it got halfway. Fresh jackal reinforcements moved to surround them, only to be wiped out themselves as Cat's LAIG roared to life from inside the outpost. "I've got control of their security systems," she reported. "Automated turrets are keeping the Covenant outside at bay while I prep the relay to broadcast." "Hear that, Reach?" Jorge shouted over the open channel as he bashed a jackal across the jaw with his rifle stock. "We're still in this fight." Their defiant last stand had sowed chaos and confusion amongst the Covenant occupiers. Plasma grenades suddenly arced down from the roof, hurled by Cat to blast stunned grunts apart. Under the withering crossfire, the Covenant fell into disarray and panicked retreat. Within several minutes, the outpost exterior had been cleared. Cat gave the all-clear to approach as Jorge and Six moved inside. Technicians were already arriving to reactivate the damaged relay equipment. "Nice work indeed," Colonel Holland commended over comms. "That should keep Covenant comms jamming from spreading. Now get to the spaceport," Our orbital defenses are faltering." The 3 Spartans raced to the roof, where a falcon awaited to ferry them towards their next crisis point. 6 looked back the way they had come, seeing the scope of the invasion for the first time. Dozens of Covenant cruisers hovered above the planet, raining troops and plasma upon cities and military bases. It seemed Reach was destined to burn. The noble team had already pulled off the impossible once today. They would simply have to do the impossible again, as many times as it took to turn the tide. Jorge clasped Six's shoulder firmly as the falcon lifted into the smoky skies. Their fight here was just beginning. Chapter 6. The falcon swooped low over charred and corpse-strewn streets, weaving between buildings for cover. They were deep in Covenant-controlled territory now, having crossed the front lines to reach the spaceport Holland ordered them to save. 6 could see its tall launch gantries in the distance, under artillery bombardment from a CCS-class battlecruiser hovering overhead. "Listen up, nobles," Holland briefed them. "That relay outpost bought us some time, but not enough cruisers are moving into position across the planet to provide air support while they advance the ground assault." He continued grimly, "Our fleet is barely holding orbit as it is. If that spaceport gets captured fully functional, the Covenant air power will mop up our defensive line." "We'll get it done, Colonel," Jorge vowed. "Just deliver us to the LZ." Their falcon approached low and fast, using a highway bridge for cover until it crossed into the spaceport perimeter. The sight of Covenant forces crawling over the complex made it clear this would be no easy task. As the dropship flared to land in the shadow of a gantry, Cat opened up with the chin turret to secure their LZ. Hitting the ground at speed, Noble Team fanned out amongst loading equipment and cargo crates, using them for cover as Banshees began strafing runs. While Cat laid down suppressing fire, 6 peeked out and spotted a squad of skirmishers attempting to outflank them. He took aim and dropped them with clean headshots. "Looks like they set up an anti-air battery near the main hangar," Jun observed over comms from his rooftop perch. "I've got no visual on the cruiser from here, though." "We'll handle the AA guns, you focus on clearing a path to the hangar," Jorge instructed. "Cat, find a way to get up high and disrupt that battlecruiser somehow." With the game plan set, Noble Team pushed further into the spaceport, leapfrogging each other between cover positions. Hulking hunters lumbered into view and unleashed scorching plasma beams. Dodging the deadly energy, 6 dove and rolled into cover behind a crate, while the hunters exploded it with sustained fire. The instant their barrage halted to recharge, he popped up, pumping shotgun rounds into the exposed orange flesh of one hunter until it toppled. The second beast swung its shield arm to smash 6, but Jorge was already there, catching the blow against his own armor and barely holding it back. "I've got this one. Focus fire left side." Jorge strained through gritted teeth. Trusting him, 6 circled right, while Cat poured fire into the hunter's left to distract it. When 6 reached the back of the creature, he jammed his knife hilt deep into the worm colony. The hunter spasmed and collapsed. Leaping atop a cargo container, Cat used the elevation to spot the anti-air batteries ahead. "I see the AA position. It's crawling with infantry support, but seems lightly armored from the rear." "Copy that. We'll hit it fast and hard from behind," Jorge said. 6, bring grenades and a surprise for our friends." While the 2 Spartans stealthily maneuvered into position, Cat went high, scaling maintenance gantries on the side of the hangar. From her vantage, she could see the battlecruiser maintaining its bombardment of the spaceport, trying to support Covenant forces below. if she could board the ship and disable it somehow. In position, Jorge reported over comms, snapping Kat's focus back to the task at hand. She peered down to see the two Spartans directly behind the AA battery. It consisted of a stationary plasma cannon flanked by grunts, with elites overseeing nearby. "Do it," she said simply. On her cue, 6 sprinted right at the battery, while Jorge strode out and ejected a bubble shield from his gauntlet. The shimmering energy field enveloped him as plasma fire splashed across its surface. While the Covenant poured fire onto the invincible Jorge, 6 slammed home a power drain within the shield perimeter. The pulse instantly disabled the battery, and Jorge dropped the bubble shield. With the hijacked cannon out of commission, the Spartans blitzed the stunned defenders. Jorge speared an elite on his shotgun's bayonet, while 6 finished off the grunts with cracked skulls and slashed throats amidst cries of dismay. The hangar entrance now lay directly ahead of them, with Jun reporting Covenant forces fortifying just inside. Jorge took point while 6 sheathed his knife and readied grenades. At Jorge's go signal, they breached the doorway by hurling frag grenades in unison onto the waiting Covenant squad. As grunts fled from the blasts, the Spartans charged in firing, cutting down the remaining defenders. The hangar interior was cluttered with equipment and few aliens. Most had clustered at the main entrance. With the element of surprise still on their side, 6 and Jorge swiftly mopped up the stragglers. "That's the hangar clear," Jorge reported. "Kat, what's your status?" Clinging to the side of the cruiser, Kat had managed to pry open a maintenance hatch and slip inside. "I'm on the cruiser itself now, going to find a way to disable it from within." "Keep us posted. We'll push for the hangar entrance and wait for your signal," Jorge said. Working their way quickly through corridor mazes inside the hangar, Noble team approached the main exterior gates. Heavy Covenant forces had dug in just outside the entrance, with Wraith tanks and squads of infantry ready to repel any counterattack. "Kat, whatever you're going to do up there, better make it quick," Jun advised from his sniper perch. "We're about to have a lot of angry company down here." Moving swiftly through the cruiser's passages, Kat came across the door to the main power core. Forcing her way inside, she saw rows of towering glowing cylinders, the ship's plasma distribution network. These conduits fed energy from the reactors to all the cruiser's major systems. If she could trigger a core overload, the resulting high-energy reaction would consume the ship in seconds. Lifting her assault rifle, Kat sprayed bursts into the sensitive components until warning klaxons blared. Blue coolant began spraying from ruptured pipes as the reactors destabilized. Her work done, Kat sprinted back for the exit. "Brace yourselves. I just started a chain reaction in the power core," she reported. "This ship is about to tear itself apart." The Covenant troops mobilizing outside the hangar reacted in dismay as explosions erupted along the cruiser's hull. Then a series of larger detonations cascaded through the core network, making the ship buckle and drop altitude. Secondary explosions blossomed within the cruiser until finally its reactors went critical. A blinding flash enveloped the ship as it tore itself asunder from the inside out. The expanding ball of plasma incinerated the Covenant forces still underneath and around the spaceport. Jorge and 6 watched from the hangar gates as debris rained down through ruptured clouds of smoke. "Kat, report. Are you clear of the blast zone?" Jorge called over comms, but got only static in response. "Can you see anything on thermals?" 6 asked Jun urgently. After several moments, Jun replied somberly. Thermals are showing no survivors in the vicinity. The ship's reactors burned too hot. Jorge stared silently at the smoldering crater where the Covenant cruiser had been. So much sacrifice, just to claim one ship? And there were dozens more still bombarding them from orbit. Cat was gone, like the others. Soon only he remained of the original noble squad. Jorge, I'm sorry about Cat, but we need you, Jun said over comms, snapping him alert. That blast stirred up chaos, but the Covenant will regroup soon. Jorge took a deep, steadying breath. You're right. We have to keep moving. He turned to Six. Grab a vehicle. We need to break out west and disrupt their supply lines. Nodding, Six jogged into the vehicle depot and hopped on a mongoose ATV while Jorge climbed onto a warthog. Together they sped out from the spaceport onto a highway bridging the city. Speeding back towards Covenant lines, they saw enemy units in disorder from the cruiser explosion. Their comms are still scrambled. We need to exploit this confusion, Jorge said. He barreled down smaller side streets, ramming grunts too stunned to flee. When a ghost revealed itself around the corner, Six launched a grenade that sent the craft spinning out in flames. Reaching the city outskirts, they came across convoys of Covenant armor and supplies being marshaled to reinforce the invasion. Spotting the Spartan vehicles approaching, a column of Wraith tanks angled their mortars to return fire. Jorge slammed the brakes and fishtailed their warthog behind cover. Those tanks have us pinned down. He barked to Six. See if you can get around their flank. I'll keep them distracted. Trusting him, Six gunned his mongoose engine and accelerated out across open ground, trying to circumvent the Wraith's firing line. Plasma mortars rained down around him as the Covenant convoy pursued. Bobbing and weaving at top speed, Six slipped between bolts before closing on the tanks. With their turrets slower to rotate, Six saw his opening. He drove straight under the barrel of the rearmost Wraith, jumped off, and slapped a grenade onto its hull as it passed over. The grenade exploded right on the Wraith's vulnerable reactor, consuming the tank in blue fire. Using the mongoose for cover amidst return fire, Six dashed between vehicles, planting grenades onto unsuspecting targets. More eruptions bloomed within the convoy formation as its vehicles were mined into oblivion. Soon, the remaining aliens broke rank and retreated from the explosive ambush. That did it, Six. The route west is clear, Jorge called, riding to meet him. But as Six climbed back aboard the battered mongoose, a ear-splitting noise echoed from above. The duo glanced up to see an approaching Covenant cruiser angling directly over their position. They must have zeroed in on our position. Move, Jorge bellowed. But before they could react, a blinding beam projected down from the cruiser, enveloping the highway. Six felt a surge of searing heat and light as the pavement evaporated underneath him. Then, darkness took him. Slowly, muffled voices and sensations began to filter back into Six's numbed mind. Sight and sound returned in blurry fragments. He was propped against concrete, body aching. Marines stood over him, administering biofoam to his wounds. Easy, Spartan, just relax, one corpsman said. As Six's vision focused, he saw Jorge laying nearby, battered and bloody, but somehow still alive after the glassing beam. The MJOL and IR suits had shielded them from instant vaporization, but only barely. The young Spartan shook his swimming head to clear it. What happened? He mumbled. A cruising Covenant ship glassed a swath of highway with you two still on it, the paramedic explained. Your armor-lock survival mode is the only reason you survive. Marines had arrived to extract them shortly after. But the landscape told the tale. Where the highway had once stretched, now only a glassy gulch remained, melted clean through. All their progress pushing back the Covenant advance had been erased in an instant. And the invaders were still firmly entrenched across most of Reach. As Six limped over to Jorge, the large Spartan coughed and pulled himself unsteadily to his feet, waving off help from the medics. Seeing Six, Jorge grasped his shoulder firmly. We took a beating, but we're still breathing, he said between pained breaths. And there are men and women across this planet still counting on us for hope. We have to keep fighting, Six, for all of them. Battered and mourning lost comrades, Noble Team's remaining warriors found new reserves of defiance stirring within. The Covenant sought to drown Reach's hope in darkness and fire. But hope was not so easily extinguished while Spartans still drew breath. It would carry the torch for Cat and the others. Until their dying breath, Noble Team would stand firm against the endless night. Chapter 7. A pall of smoke hung over the horizon as the Falcons carried Noble Team over the charred remains of a country road. Only Jorge and Six now remain of the once unstoppable squad. As they flew further inland, the true extent of the Covenant's ruthless glassing campaign became apparent. What were once rolling green hills and peaceful homesteads had been reduced to fields of blackened earth and melted bedrock. Entire towns and lush forests were absent now, hollow footprints in the planet's ravaged surface. This had been just one more hateful act in a genocidal campaign against humanity itself. Passing near the ruins of Hope Ridge, Jorge spotted Covenant holdouts still lingering at the glassed ghost town. "Drop us here," he said. "We need to clear those stragglers out." The Falcons descended through swirling ash and dust kicked up by the rotors. Six and Jorge jumped clear, weapons ready for whatever awaited them. Across the darkened streets, grunts howled in excitement at the newly arrived prey. Needler rounds and plasma bolts peppered the air around the Spartans. Surging ahead through the fire, Jorge roared a defiant battle cry that echoed down the empty avenues, amplified by his helmet speakers. The grunts cried out in dismay as the green colossus barreled forth lethally into their ranks, stopping only when the last alien in Hope Ridge had been gutted or trampled beneath his boots. Regrouping with Six, Jorge observed memorials and bouquets left at the town's edge by survivors who had returned to mourn what was lost. These people wanted only peace, Jorge said solemnly. Now we owe them vengeance. Nearby, the two Spartans discovered a field hospital bunker that had survived beneath the glassing. Pushing inside, they found rows of wounded civilians and troopers being treated in dark, cramped confines. The cave echoed with cries of pain and despair. "Please, you have to help them," a doctor implored Noble Team. "The Covenant control the skies. We can't evacuate the wounded anywhere safely." Jorge turned to Six and gripped his shoulder firmly. "I'll get these people evacuated. Then you and I will make the Covenant regret ever coming to Reach." Nodding, Six helped Jorge load the injured refugees aboard their Falcons, while the doctor provided coordinates to underground shelter networks. Soon the ships were fully laden with survivors and lifted off, cruising low through valleys to avoid Covenant patrols. Jorge watched them shrink into specks on the horizon, bound for what little safety this world still promised. When the last transport had vanished from sight, Jorge turned his gaze back to the glassed wasteland surrounding them. His fists clenched involuntarily. The hour of vengeance had come. "Colonel Holland, do you read?" Jorge barked into his comm. "I need a tactical overview." After a burst of static, Holland responded, "Jorge, good to hear your voice. Covenant forces have been concentrated heavily along this glacier ridge since yesterday." Nav data flashed across Jorge's ITUD, showing a large icy mountain range far to the north dotted with enemy units. "They've set up heavier anti-air batteries all through the peaks," Holland continued. "If we want to get transports back down to the surface safely, those guns need to go." Jorge zoomed in on the highlighted AA emplacements. "Understood. Noble 6 and I will handle it personally." He turned to 6 with fierce determination in his eyes. "This is it, Spartan, time for an old-fashioned death or glory mission. One last fight, side by side, fulfilling their duty to the very end." The Spartans moved swiftly and silently through the frozen mountain valleys, evading Covenant patrols. As night fell, darkness and drifting snow shrouded their stealthy approach towards the looming ridgeline ahead. Jorge and 6 were going against an entire occupation army with just the weapons and ammo on their backs. But they had survived impossible odds before. And this time, they were not interested merely in survival. Their mission was righteous vengeance. Creeping between jagged outcroppings near the Covenant's glacier stronghold, noble teams stopped to observe the sprawling complex dug into the sloping ice face. Squads of grunts waddled about while elite commanders barked orders under spotlights. The AA batteries they had come to destroy sat clustered atop the ridge itself. "Too many eyes up top for a direct assault," Jorge assessed. "We'll never get close to the guns that way. I'll cause a distraction down below while you infiltrate further up the backside. Take out those batteries any way you can." 6 gave a silent nod and headed uphill, slipping stealthily over the icy terrain. Jorge crouched behind a snowbank, chambering an incendiary grenade into his launcher. "Say goodnight, grunts," he muttered before firing directly into a fuel depot. The volatile chemicals ignited furiously, engulfing the Covenant encampment in roiling flames. Grunts and jackals scrambled in all directions as Jorge emerged from cover, pelting the area with more grenades. Through the chaos, 6 scaled higher, finding a narrow path leading up along the ridge. Reaching the AA battery plateau, he darted between installations, evading searchlights. These were heavy plasma cannons on rotating turrets, manned by elite crews. 6 moved behind one and stabbed his knife up through the back of the gunner's neck. The lifeless elite slumped forward, exposing the battery's internal workings. Rifling through his pack, 6 grimaced as he realized he only had 2 grenades left. He jammed them both into the cannon's firing coil, then slid down the icy slope. The detonation set off a chain reaction as the overloaded battery erupted. Its neighbor batteries quickly succumbed to sympathetic explosions. Down below, Jorge saw the ridge guns erupting one by one in fiery belches. 6, talk to me. Are you clear of the blasts? He called over comms, but got only crackling static. Had he lost the last of Noble as well? Jorge's heart sank until out of the smoke came a lone figure rappelling down the cliff face. "Miss me?" 6 asked with a hint of humor as he landed in a heap beside Jorge. "Not even close," Jorge chuckled, relief washing over him. Together, they watched burning wreckage tumble down into the valley from the ridge. Without those guns, the evacuation transports could get through. Where one chapter ended, a new one could begin thanks to Noble's sacrifice. Colonel Holland, the guns are down. You should have a clear window to get your transports away, Jorge reported proudly. But Holland's reply was alarmed. Negative, Jorge. We have a new problem, a Covenant corvette making a slipspace jump into low orbit. Sure enough, Six and Jorge gazed upward to see fiery light tearing through the clouds where a corvette was emerging, escorting multiple landing craft full of troops. Those transports will be defenseless, Jorge realized. We have to intercept that corvette. Sprinting now, retracing their steps, the Spartans moved with feverish haste back through the valleys. A pair of falcons swooped down to fetch them. Jorge ripped a door gun off its swivel mount and leaned out as they lifted off, racing to intercept the corvette dropships. Their engines screamed at maximum output. Laser fire reached up from the surface, trying to swat them from the sky. But the falcons jinked and swooped through it. In the distance, the corvette loomed nearer, still escorted by a wing of banshees. Jorge opened fire with the chin gun, splashing one fighter's hull with rounds until it spiraled away trailing smoke. They were closing fast now on a collision course. We have to take out that corvette's weapon systems before it can target the transports, Jorge shouted over the howling wind. Six met his gaze and nodded. Side by side, the two Spartans lined up their falcons and stood atop the open troop base. Timing it perfectly as they passed beneath the descending corvette, noble team leapt together across the void. Jorge and Six hurtled through open air towards the belly of the passing corvette. With flawless coordination born of endless training, they managed to grab hold of external pipes and anchor themselves to the ship's underhull as it continued its atmospheric entry. Activating maglocks in their armor's gloves and boots, the two Spartans began climbing rapidly across the corvette's outer plating while buffeted by blistering descent speeds. Moving sideways along the hull, they slipped through a maintenance hatch into a mechanical bay. The Covenant ship began angling itself upward to slow descent. Have to find the bridge, take out the shipmaster to cripple its weapons, Jorge said, checking the stolen schematics Cat had acquired on Covenant ships. The two super soldiers moved swiftly through corridors, neutralizing patrols with silenced headshots. Surprise was still their ally. Reaching a wide chamber dotted with holo displays, they realized it was the bridge. A Sangheili in elaborate armor stood directing the descent from the command platform, the shipmaster. Jorge and Six stepped out in unison, weapons leveled at the target. Vita rings. The elite roared in anger at the unexpected boarders. But before he could raise alarms, Uteri's head snapped back under the explosive impact of Jorge's .50 caliber round. The bridge doors slammed shut and locked as Noble Team seized control. Get on navigation. Bring us down away from those transports, Jorge ordered Six, who rushed to the alien controls. The corvette shuddered as it dipped into thicker atmosphere. Outside the viewports, the evacuation ships were nearing escape velocity. Have control, Six reported, as he pulled back on the gravity drive, diverting their course away from Holland's ships. But as the corvette leveled out, plasma batteries rang to life, trying to shoot them down. Damn, the ship's automated defenses are still online, Jorge growled. Get down to the reactor core and overload it manually. I'll handle things here. Trusting him, Six sprinted from the bridge down, spiraling corridors towards the engine room as the ship shuddered under internal bombardments. Coolant spewed from ruptured pipes along the passageway. Six pried open the reactor door and began ripping out power conduits. Warning klaxons blared as the core destabilized, but Six kept tearing out components right until the room was engulfed in a flash of light. The chain reaction cascaded through adjoining decks. Six used armor lock as the ship ripped itself apart around him. On the bridge, Jorge saw warp space fill the viewport as the Corvette's reactors finally breached. "I've got you now, bastards," he said under his breath, as the explosion consumed the ship in a purifying light. Jorge thought of the faces of noble team in his last moment. Their legacy would endure. Then came silence. Complete, uniform silence, like a soft blanket enveloping Six's world. Slowly, sensation began returning to his numb limbs. The Spartan opened his eyes to find himself laying in a shallow impact crater amidst smoldering wreckage. Utterly still, yet alive. Staggering to his feet and surveying the landscape, Six saw the smoldering trail of the Corvette's crash carved across the valley floor. Debris still rained intermittently from the sky, like tears mourning the ship's passage. In the deathly quiet, Six activated his calm. "Jorge, this is Six. Are you there?" Only static answered. His fists clenched involuntarily. Jorge had sacrificed himself to finish the mission, just like the others. A set of dog tags glinted in the dirt nearby. Six knelt and gingerly collected them. The sole reminders of his comrades, to whose legacy he was now the inheritor. Gazing upward, Six saw the last transports vanishing into the upper atmosphere, bound for safe harbor thanks to Noble's heroic final act. Hope lived on for the people of Reach, even if darkness now closed on her defenders for good. Lifting Jorge's tags with reverent care, Noble Six turned and began the long march across Reach's graveyard of heroes. Where this lone wolf wandered now, only duty and death still followed. Chapter 8. Drifting ash flecked his armor as Six trudged through the glass wastes, alone with only ghosts at his side. The plea for help had reached him on shortwave, a repeated SOS sent out in desperation from the besieged FOB. With Jorge gone, Six was the last ember of Noble team still burning, and so the call had fallen to him. Drawing closer to the embattled base, Six took cover in a crater and observed through his scope. The fortification was hopelessly surrounded by Covenant armor and infantry now. A scarab walker loomed over the buildings, trying to stomp them flat beneath its legs. The Marines desperately needed a miracle if any would survive this onslaught. And so, a miracle is what Six would provide. Moving stealthily between cover positions, Six slipped through the perimeter and into the FOB undetected. Bodies of Marines littered the battered grounds. Ducking into the headquarters, Six found a handful of ragged survivors, huddled together as explosions rocked the building. One Marine nearly shot Six before realizing he was friendly. "Oh man, are we glad to see you," he said with relief. "We're all that's left here." Six shook his head. "Not anymore. You men fall back to the forest for extraction. I will deal with the Covenant here." The soldiers exchanged uneasy glances. "With respect, we barely survived their first attack," the corporal noted. "Now they've tripled their forces. No way you're facing that horde alone." A loud crash echoed nearby as the scarab bisected a barracks with its beam. Six looked them over, resolve hardening his voice. "You've done your duty here. Now get your wounded out safely. I can buy you time." The corporal started to object, but glimpsed the unwavering certainty in the Spartan's visor. Finally, he nodded reluctantly. "We'll make you proud, sir." While the Marines slipped quietly from the base perimeter, Six emerged from cover and hurled a grenade to draw the Covenant's attention. As they began converging on his position, Six sprinted straight at the scarab. He leapt onto its foreleg joint and clambered up the angular surface. The walker shuddered, trying to shake the unwanted passenger. Reaching the command deck, Six smashed the glass canopy shielding the elite pilot and ripped it from control. With the scarab hijacked, Six turned its weapons on the Covenant below. The giant beam cut a searing swath through their ranks, while infantry scattered in terror. Through the chaos, Six spotted Spec Ops elites rallying survivors to focus fire on the rogue scarab. He pushed the walker at full speed towards their position, unleashing plasma bolts from its turrets. The Covenant line buckled and broke beneath the onslaught. With their heavy armor turned against them, the Covenant retreated from the FOB in disarray. Their orderly advance had collapsed into a panicked rout thanks to Six's gambit. Surging forward, he stomped Marines' bodies beneath the scarab's feet, relentlessly running the aliens down. Only when no more Covenant remained standing did Six finally power down the hijacked walker. He watched through its optics as Pelicans arrived to extract the survivors he had saved. Duty done, Six turned the war machine back towards Covenant lines. There were more battles to contest before this was over. More miracles to conjure. Several days later, Six stood atop a ridge observing the sprawling alien shipyard below. Dozens of Covenant cruisers and transports were gathered here, being refitted and loaded for further attacks. The scope of their military power was daunting. Six's commandeered scarab lumbered up nearby, responding to his summons. He dropped inside the cockpit and prepared to move on the shipyard. But as the walker stepped out, plasma bolts and needler rounds suddenly peppered its hull from all sides. Banshees screamed overhead, unleashing fuel rod bombardment. His ambush spoiled, Six backed the scarab into cover, but found himself surrounded and outgunned. He had no army, and now his mighty weapon was failing under the onslaught. Gritting his teeth, Six triggered the scarab's overload sequence and jumped to safety an instant before it erupted in a massive explosion. Sprinting now, Six slipped away amidst burning debris from the fallen walker. Its loss was a painful blow to his one-man crusade. For weeks, he had rained destruction on the Covenant using that scarab, buying precious time for evacuation efforts. Now he was reduced again to just himself and 2 holstered guns. Returning to familiar mountains, Six stopped short when he glimpsed Covenant encampments dug into the valleys below. This was not just some scout force, an entire occupation army now infested these peaks. Fresh rage simmered in Six, hotter than plasma. Descending stealthily, Six reached the nearest Covenant position. Grunts waddled about between glowing conduits, while an elite stood guard up on a ridge. Six crept behind it and snapped the alien's neck, lowering its body silently. He moved amongst the camp, knifing unsuspecting grunts one by one. Soon dark violet blood stained the snow at his feet. Not a shot had been fired to avoid alerting neighboring camps. Surveying the carnage, Six lifted his gaze to the peaks above, now occupied by hostile forces. His crusade had only just begun. Like an avenging shadow, Six swept through the network of Covenant camps spread across the mountains. Stealthy ambushes became furious close-quarters blade work which gave way to explosive sabotage of their machinery. He pressed on relentlessly, never tiring, never stopping until every last alien threat had been eliminated from the entire area. From the final icy ridge, Six spotted a pair of falcons coming to meet him, having watched his solitary advance from afar. Colonel Holland's voice came over the comm. Noble Six, you fought hard keeping the Covenant off balance, but this war is bigger than one soldier. The dropships landed and Holland stepped out. His expression was sympathetic but adamant. Come with us, it's time. Six stood motionless, weighing duty and vengeance. Finally, he dipped his head in assent and mounted the falcon without a word. Holland clasped his shoulder and nodded back firmly. Together they lifted off, turning southwest, towards Reach's last hope. The falcons swept low over forests and hills wreathed in mist. Six sat silent, mentally preparing himself for the coming trial. Holland's brow was furrowed, his jaw clenched. The coming hours would determine the fate of every living being on this planet. Reach's few remaining battle groups were massing for an all-out assault on a Covenant supercarrier recently dropped into atmosphere. The aliens were using its fearsome weaponry to decimate what little organized resistance still stood against them. But with the carrier gone, Reach would finally have a chance to rest and recover. One small hope against impossible odds. It was a situation Noble Team had pulled off before. But this time, Six would be truly alone on the front lines. He checked his rifle obsessively, the ritual motions ingrained by years of warfare. Nothing existed now but the mission. There it is, Holland said grimly, pointing out the viewport. In the distance, the mammoth carrier hovered over a glassed basin, surrounded by an occupation force. The sight was daunting, even for a Spartan. Holland clasped Six's shoulder one last time. Reach's fate is in your hands now, Noble. The dropships flared fast behind a tree line, avoiding enemy detection. Six stepped out and immediately darted left into the brush, evading the spotlights. He slipped silently through the trees until the carrier loomed directly ahead, then sprinted straight for its gravity lift. There was a stomach-churning vertical surge as Six was propelled up into the bowels of the warship. But he emerged with guns blazing, shredding a trio of startled Ungoi before they could react. Alarms began sounding immediately at the infiltrators' presence. Moving swiftly through the purple-hued corridors, Six raced directly for the ship's bridge, leaving a trail of Covenant dead. He primed grenades and hurled them ahead at checkpoints, then fired through the debris in confusion. There could be no pause, no hesitation with an entire crew mobilizing against him. At last, Six reached the carrier's command center. He triggered the door and dove through, guns level. But instead of the bridge, he found himself inside an alien hangar bay. A gravity lift sat at its center, surrounded by elites and Ungoi who turned in surprise at the intruder. Demon, an elite ultra, roared furiously. Six realized his mistake. This was a trap sprung on the human's sole asset. He opened fire, even knowing he was already dead. The Covenant rushed to surround and disarm him. Dragged before the Ultra, Six was forced to his knees as energy swords crossed at his neck. The alien leader chuckled, savoring this small moment of revenge against the campaigns of bloodshed unleashed by Noble Team. It lifted its blade for the killing stroke, only to topple back suddenly as its head exploded from a high-velocity round. All at once the hangar exploded into blistering crossfire as teams of ODSTs fast roped down from stealth pods embedded in the ceiling. You didn't think we were sending you in alone, did you? Colonel Holland asked Riley over comms. Together, the troopers and Six carved through the hangar's defenders with renewed fury. The Ultra's trap had failed. Fighting side by side with the ODSTs, Six reoriented himself and led the way towards the carrier's actual bridge. The halls ran dark purple with pooling alien blood, before Noble 6 stormed onto the command deck. He pulled the shipmaster from his throne and snapped his neck with one vicious wrench. "Navigation is ours," an ODST shouted, seizing the gravity controls. Working together, they angled the wounded carrier away from the ongoing ground battle raging below its hull. But as it limped over the horizon, a blinding light enveloped the command center. "Incoming fleet," Holland warned over comms. "Get out of there." It was too late. The searing glassing beam penetrated directly into the bridge just as 6 jumped clear. The carrier ruptured violently, spilling ODSTs and equipment into open sky. 6 could only watch helplessly as the ship came apart. With his armor in freefall, 6 stared down at the raging battle on Reach's surface as he plummeted. The carrier's hull crashed catastrophic down onto Covenant positions, buying the human forces precious breathing room. Tonight, Reach would live on to fight another day. But as for her battered defenders, peace awaited at long last past the end of their final plunge. Closing his eyes, Noble 6 embraced that soothing promise as the ground rushed up to meet him. Chapter 9. Consciousness returned in fragments. A kaleidoscope of faded sensations slowly coalescing into tangible form. The pungent smell of scorched earth, motion, on a stretcher being carried. Hushed voices urgent. The smell of blood and iron. Of pain. 6's eyes fluttered open to blinding white light overhead. Shock troopers were rushing him down a corridor, med station. His battered armor had been stripped away, body simply wrapped in bandages and polymer casts. An ODST noticed him stirring and shouted for a medic. "Just relax, Spartan, you've been through hell," the corpsman soothed while checking 6's injuries with a stethoscope and flashbeam. "Crash like that would have pulped a regular soldier. Sheer luck your augmentations kept you intact." 6 tried sitting up but collapsed back under the spike of pain from fractured ribs and deep musculoskeletal trauma. His thoughts swirled muddy as toxins filtered from his blood. "The mission," he mumbled bitterly. "Failed?" "Easy now, we'll get you patched up," the medic reassured. But 6 grabbed his sleeve with an iron grip, unwilling to slip back into darkness before knowing the truth. "The battle, the Covenant," 6 pressed urgently. "What happened down there?" Sighing, the ODST relented. "That carrier breaking up disrupted their attack just long enough for us to stabilize the line. We're still fighting, thanks to you." 6 felt a small ember of satisfaction at that. He had upheld his duty to the very end. But his body could continue no further. This had been a death ride from the outset. His hand went limp as the medic eased him back down. Time lost meaning after that. Days or weeks could have passed while 6 hovered comatose, kept functioning only by machinery and intravenous tubes. When clarity finally resurfaced fully, 6 awoke to find the world transformed. The med station corridors were strewn with debris and pooled blood. Distant explosions rumbled while emergency lights flickered erratically. No doctors walked the halls now. Something catastrophic had happened in his convalescence. Pulling free of buckled restraints, 6 dragged his weakened body from the surgical suite out into a hallway filled with makeshift barricades and discarded weapons and equipment. The walls were riddled with bullet holes. His mind raced to analyze this unfamiliar hellscape if clearly the station had come under attack at some point. Where were the wounded troopers and medical staff now? Six's thoughts were answered in the most horrific way as he turned a corner. A pile of bloodied corpses lay slumped where they had gathered for a final stand. The last ragged defenses of the evacuated med station. Amongst the dead, Six spotted familiar ODST armor. No, he uttered in dismay. They had saved him from the carrier just for this? Rage simmered within the Spartan. He had been spared only to awake to tragedy. Six knelt and closed the eyes of a nearby corpseman, silently honoring the fallen. Spotting a discarded pistol, Six limped through ravaged wards searching for clues about this massacre. All evidence pointed to a swift and brutal assault. The Covenant had learned of this hospital's location and cultural backdrop is a story of personal growth, overcoming regret, and finding hope in times of darkness after losing her closest friends. A young woman journeys across a fantasy realm to save her mentor from a dark fate. Along the way, she finds companionship and courage, while learning to let go of past failures. Though tested by peril, her compassion and resilience lead towards redemption. Moving deeper into the shattered med station, Six discovered only more scenes of horror. The Covenant had been utterly ruthless in eradicating this place of healing. He passed laboratory chambers where doctors had been executed at their desks, surgical tools still clutched in cold, dead hands. Six's fists clenched with rising anger. These non-combatants posed no threat, yet had been slaughtered like animals. For the first time since waking, he was thankful for the white-hot rage flowing through his veins. It tempered his lingering wounds and fueled purpose where hope had abandoned him. Reaching the med station motor pool, Six found a discarded set of fatigues that he donned for basic protection. He still needed armor and weapons before this personal war could escalate any further. Spotting a crashed Warthog nearby, Six searched its compartment and discovered a MA-5B rifle with half a magazine remaining. The armor would have to wait. With firearm in hand, Six strode from the ravaged hospital to finally behold the landscape awaiting him. A desolate vista of toppled buildings and rubble met his gaze. The sky was choked with smoke from raging fires across the shattered city. In the distance, Covenant dropships descended relentlessly. This could only mean one thing: a Reach had fallen. Humanity had been bled dry, holding the line here for months, allowing evacuation efforts to save a portion of the population. Now the few who remained were being hunted to extinction. Studying the terrain, Six noted a position atop a semi-intact skyscraper that would serve as suitable overwatch. He could launch guerrilla strikes from there and assess enemy movements. Getting vengeance for the slaughtered med staff would have to wait. First, he needed intel on what he faced. Moving carefully between cover, Six slipped unnoticed into the deserted tower and climbed to a shielded vantage. From this high perch, he peered through the scope and finally witnessed Reach's grave condition. The streets below were filled with grunts and jackals prodding bodies while phantoms delivered reinforcements. An entire Covenant armada hovered over the city. What ships remained of the UNSC fleet were being systematically hunted down and destroyed. Six watched helplessly as a distant Paris-class frigate tried to limp away, only to be cut in half by a CCS cruiser's lance. He was merely one man, witnessing the last breaths of a world. Days passed as Reach's last survivor continued his vigil, striking against the Covenant when opportunities arose, then fading away before reprisal could find him. Ambushes and acts of sabotage allowed Six to gradually whittle down isolated patrols, buying time for any other survivors. But he knew ultimately there would be no escape. This ordeal ended only one way. When an elite squad finally stormed Six's tower stronghold, He did not flee. He stood and fought with simmering hatred until the precise moment his rifle clicked empty. As the alien warriors moved in on their cornered prey, a death's head ODST emerged from the shadows and opened up on full auto, cutting down the entire Covenant flank with pinpoint shots. The trooper rushed over, propping Six up before he could collapse. "Sorry I'm late to the party, Spartan. Let's get you out of this hellhole." But Six just shook his head resignedly. "This fight ends here today, for all of us." The ODST hesitated, then slowly nodded, understanding what needed to be done. "Never figured I'd get the honor of making a final stand with a Spartan. Always figured I'd just be vapor." Despite everything, Six felt the tug of a grim smile under his helmet. "Then let's show them nobility when the end finds us." Outside the tower windows, an entire Covenant battle group was massing for the surface extermination. Wraith tanks took up positions around the building as Banshees circled. An Ultra bellowed threats over a loudspeaker, demanding surrender. There would be no mercy, only slow agony for these last vermin. In answer, the rooftop observation post erupted in blossoming explosions as its reactor was overloaded. From the smoke and fire, 2 armored figures strode into view and raised weapons defiantly towards the closing foes. "Come and get it, you ugly squid-faced freaks," the ODST thundered. Together, the unlikely allies unleashed every ounce of firepower they had left into the assembled Covenant battalion. Grunts and jackals fell by the dozen under the crippling crossfire. A stack of fusion coils was triggered into a series of eruptions that obliterated whole squads. But still the enemies kept coming, their hatred of humanity overpowering any instinct of self-preservation. A Wraith scored a direct mortar hit that knocked Six and the trooper to their knees atop the tower. They rose unsteadily, armor rent and leaking blood. Their end was imminent now. The ODST turned to Six and clasped his shoulder. "For reach." Six met his gaze. "For reach." Then, as one, they let out hoarse cries of utter defiance and leveled their rifles on full auto scream into the endless waves. The Spartan and human stood tall to the last, consumed in plasma yet never broken. Reach perished that day, but was not defeated. Chapter 10. Silence and shadow had fallen over the dead planet. Noble Six walked alone through streets, choked with ash and ruins. No birds sang in the spaceport trees, only wind sighed mournful amidst skeletal towers. Reach had breathed its last. Climbing to a bombed-out overpass, Six surveyed the scope of oblivion spanning in all directions. A landscape haunted now only by phantoms. The planet he had fought so desperately to defend was gone, its hopes and dreams turned to glass. In the distance, Six spotted surviving Covenant scavengers, combing through the corpse-strewn streets for any artifacts of their lost holy relic. The demons and heretics were no more, but still these aliens clung desperately to their delusions of divine righteousness. Their faith had been their people's undoing. A phantom gunship glided overhead, likely ferrying troops to reinforce the meager holdouts still occupying this graveyard. Six's fists tightened involuntarily at the mere sight of it. He had already visited wrath untold upon the Covenant stragglers in his path. Now came time again to vanish into the ruins and slaughter any servants of the enemy's pointless crusade he encountered. Moving between hollowed buildings and through deserted alleyways, Six stalked the waking nightmare Reach had become. The dead did not rest easy here. Their fate cried out silently from every shattered window for avenging justice. Soon enough the Spartan, came upon a wandering squad of grunts led by a lone elite miner. Hugging the cover of rubble, 6 circled behind them unseen before rushing right into their formation. Before the aliens could react, the demon was upon them, their rifle blazing and blades slashing in a whirlwind of precision death. Dark, violet blood splattered across cracked pavement. Not one of the Covenant soldiers had time to cry out under the shadow of death that fell upon them. As the last grunt collapsed gurgling, 6 saw the elite reach desperately for a plasma grenade. But a burst of rifle fire tore through its throat before the device could be primed. Silence returned to the dead street. 6 stepped over smoldering alien corpses towards a deserted town square ahead. Once perhaps the heart of the small community, it now contained only the cratered remains of a commemoration monument. Something about the solemnity of this place gave 6 pause. Kneeling, he wiped the dirt from a fractured stone plaque. It showed figures in stoic but hopeful procession, refugees seeking a new home. This settlement had been part of Reach's promise for displaced colonists fleeing the outer colony wars. They came for peace and purpose far from conflict. Instead, they found only more tragedy. The dead were all around here. Not just soldiers in this war, but innocents of families who dreamed and loved and feared just as any human. Death makes equals of all. And though 6 could not articulate why, alone here surrounded by the fallen, he felt overwhelmed by the scale of horror and loss. More than a world had died. Something beautiful and unquantifiable was now missing from the galaxy forever. For hours the Spartan lingered in that square, head bowed with hand placed on the plaque amidst sheeting rain. Saying goodbye not just to friends, but to life unfulfilled and unknown promise. Their names would be forgotten, but in his heart 6 swore to remember what they had lived and died for. Though Reach was gone, hope endures through memory. The stone felt cold against his calloused palm. 6 finally stood and left the memorial behind. There was nothing more that could be done here. No holy crusade or vendetta would restore what was lost. Time simply continued marching forward, uncaring. 6's lone journey through Reach's endless wastes gradually turned from aimless wandering to purposeful searching. He rationed what few supplies remained in abandoned caches, conserving ammunition and drinking collected rainwater. Survival was no easy task on this dead world. Yet he persisted alone. Climbing a crumbling overpass for long-distance surveillance, 6 scanned the horizons and spotted a dust trail in the far distance. After days of imposed isolation, any change merited investigating. Descending from his perch, 6 adjusted course to intercept the anomaly. Friend or foe, he would be ready. It took hours trekking on foot before 6 reached the origin. He took cover and observed for long minutes. No patrols or combat teams had come this way. Instead, 6 was surprised to spot a lone transport warthog abandoned by the roadside. Curious but cautious, he approached the stationary vehicle. The back was loaded with survival rations, medical supplies, and bottles of water. Makeshift shelters and a burned-out fire pit had been established nearby. Someone had made camp here, alone like himself. 6's instincts told him whoever it was likely remained close by. He had to find out why anyone else would still be alive on Reach. Moving slowly between derelict structures nearby, 6 swept the area, but found no signs of life. He doubled back and was passing by the warthog again when he heard a faint repetitive beeping from its cab. Instantly on alert, 6 circled the transport carefully with rifle ready. But as he came around the hood into view of the driver's side window, a sudden concussive force knocked him flat on his back. A flashbang grenade had detonated right in his face at point-blank range, leaving Six blinded and deafened. He tried scrambling to his feet, but swiftly found himself tackled down, arm twisted behind his back by a powerfully strong grip. Blinking through dancing spots as his vision returned, Six could just make out a bulky armored figure kneeling atop him. Whoever it was had managed to catch a Spartan completely off guard. But looking up through clearing haze, Six saw the armor quality was UNSC standard issue. This was no alien ambusher, but a fellow human survivor. One he realized was shockingly familiar even before they spoke. "Six, it's you made it," the voice said in stunned relief. Releasing his arm, the other rose and extended a hand down, which Six warily accepted. There stood Jorge, battered and scarred from battle, but still alive. "Thought I was done for good when that carrier went down," Jorge said. "Was prepared to join the others, but somehow I ended up spat out of that inferno, half dead and drifting through orbit." Six could only listen in astonishment as Jorge described clinging to wreckage until he was pulled aboard a lifeboat launched by Pillar of Autumn in the battle's final moments. He alone had escaped Reach's oblivion, but refusing to abandon his world had returned upon waking from cryosleep after the cataclysm. "Didn't know what I'd find down here," Jorge said solemnly, looking upon their surroundings. "Hoped I might run into friendlies, but seems we're the last ones standing, a pair of ghosts refusing to rest." He laid a heavy hand on Six's shoulder. "But it sure is good to see you again, Spartan." Six said nothing, still processing this revelation. But seeing Jorge return to him lit a small spark of kinship in his heart. Whatever end awaited them on this dead world, they would face it the way they had lived, together until the last light. In companionable silence, Jorge gathered supplies from the Warthog and prepared a modest campsite as dusk fell. He handed Six an MRE ration, which the Spartan accepted with a grateful nod. No further words needed to be spoken. As night draped her shroud over the lonely planet, two soldiers huddled around a flickering fire, finding what brief solace they could. When morning came, Jorge finished stowing their minimal gear, then turned to Six. "I prepared the Warthog for our final ride. We'll see how far she takes us." Six gave a silent nod of assent. Wherever Jorge led, he would follow unto the end. Together they climbed aboard the aged transport and began their journey across the heart of desolation. Ruined cities and charred hillsides flowed past their tires. The dead planet kept its ghosts close. Eventually, the Warthog exited a twisting mountain pass and arrived at perhaps the most tragic vista yet. Before them sprawled fields of ash littered with military craft debris and helmets atop rusted rifles driven bayonet first into the ground. This had been the heart of a final brave resistance effort. Humanity's last martial cry before oblivion. Now silence covered the valiant dead. Bringing the Warthog to a halt, Jorge and Six dismounted and proceeded solemnly on foot through the impromptu gravesite. Their boots crunched on spent shell casings beneath the ash. Jorge reached down and retrieved a helmet, shaking the ash free. He stared at the visor a long moment, as though seeing all the lost souls of Reach reflected. "I should have been here with them, Six," he spoke bitterly, clenching the rusted helmet. "Instead, I left them to die in my place." Six put one hand on Jorge's shoulder. Though he gave no reply, his meaning was clear. The past could not be changed, brothers and sisters had been lost. But they were remembered in spirit by those who yet endured. Jorge knew this truth even through his pain. Straightening, Jorge placed the helmet gently atop a rifle grave. "You're right. Can't let regret poison our last days. We'll honor their memory in word and deed." He turned to face the mountains looming over this battlefield. "It's time we reached our destination." Without glancing back, the two soldiers departed the ash fields towards a winding canyon pass cutting through the peaks. Six did not know what ultimately lay ahead. He knew only that he would soon rest. Jorge's instincts would guide them the last steps of this long road. By late day, their warthog crested the canyon road, and a vast savanna opened up before them. In the distance, the tallest tower yet seen stood alone on the plain, casting a long shadow. Six realized immediately what this place signified. Reach's noble heart. Jorge brought them up to the fortress complex and cut the engine. Together they disembarked and entered on foot through the massive doors left permanently forced open. Every surface was covered in carbon scoring and battle damage. This had been the headquarters for all of Reach's final defense. Their last sanctuary in the dying days. Now cold and still. Six followed Jorge through silent corridors and up exposed stairwells until they reached the precipice of the tower's peak. Half the observation deck had been ripped away, but still it afforded a view across half the planet. Jorge stepped to the ledge and looked upon Reach with sorrow. How far they had all fallen. "She was beautiful once, wasn't she, Six?" Jorge whispered. Six said nothing but nodded in solemn agreement. For long moments they stood together high over their lifeless world in remembrance of fading glories. But the hour grew late. Turning from the vista, Jorge moved to a shattered doorway, leading towards a spiral maintenance causeway winding down the tower exterior. Without a word, Six trailed him out along the exposed ramparts. A high wind whipped at their shoulders between rusted guardrails. Together, they descended the dizzying webwork of catwalks and platforms. Far below, the warthog waited where they had abandoned it beyond the gates. When man first arrived on Reach, hope and ambition burned bright in their souls. They came believing this world was opportunity, a new epoch for humanity looming on the horizon. But time changes all. Reaching the end of their long climb down, Jorge and Six strode through drifting ash back towards their idling transport. Though hesitant to break the reverent silence hanging over them, Jorge finally turned to his companion. "We've seen this through to the end, haven't we?" Though framed as a question, it was spoken like statement of fact. Six met his gaze and replied with a simple nod. What was left to say that had not been conveyed already through their actions? Jorge understood completely. With refreshed resolve, the two soldiers took their seats within the fading warthog. Jorge keyed the ignition and put them back underway towards the setting sun. Their course was sure and their purpose clear. No more doubts or regrets clouded the way ahead. In their final charge, noble team would again stand strong against impossible odds and laugh in the face of oblivion. They rode now towards destiny. Epilogue. A new sun slowly crested the horizon of the remote planet, casting its glow across rolling green hills and thick forests. Yet even the dawn's radiance could not fully pierce the melancholy darkness that had gripped this place. Though life still clung stubbornly under the open skies, the world felt hollow, a shadow of its former vibrancy. Ever since the fall, an almost imperceptible pall had hung over human space. News of Reach's fate had spread inexorably, crushing hearts and dashing hopes across every colony. For it had not just been a planet that died, but an idea, that even at the furthest edges of civilization, humanity yet endured and thrived. Reach was to represent the bright future, a new world where people could build lives distant from the chaos of war. The end.